That's what I want. So, Prague meeting, John Nissen, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've made some suggestion of what we might focus on for the next fortnight. A comparison of marine cloud brightening with stratospheric aerosol injection, which is something I was going to do as a paper for the AGU, but I missed the deadline, and well, I left it till the last minute, and then there was a hitch. So, and it was rather expensive as well. So I didn't do that, but I think it's something we could do because we've got advocates for stratospheric aerosol injection in the group. That's me, mainly. Well, I think Jonathan's quite a supporter as well. And marine cloud brightening, obviously you are very supportive, Robert, of that.
Well, I completely support stratospheric aerosol injection as well.
That's brilliant. Good, excellent. So hopefully Stephen will be with us, and he can correct us if we make some mistakes.
Well, Stephen's situation is that, as Jonathan just asked, he has been in hospital, and he had a hip operation, and it's the recovery has taken longer than he would have hoped, and including some problems with COVID. So let's all just hope that Stephen fully recovers, and which he fully expects to do, and but he's still in hospital, I believe, but he's hopefully be out very, very shortly back home.
Well, that would be good. So I haven't received any comments on my suggestion or suggestions for agenda, but is there there's obviously COP28 going on. There's a talk about emissions reduction and how the COP is led by an oil executive, so you can't really expect many good results to come out of the COP. I suppose support for poorer countries to actually get some money. They've been pledged lots of money in the past, but it hasn't materialized. So there seem to be more pledges this COP, announcement of many billions of pounds in aid to poorer countries to either to adapt or to use more renewables or things like that. I don't know exactly how it's partitioned, but there's still a deathly silence about actually the need for cooling technology. Some of us have been involved in the making of a list. This was Peter Wadham's and Graham Taylor and some others, Leslie Field, for example, wrote a paper on bad science, and it's quite interesting that a lot of what the politicians say is, I'm going on science, what the science says. When the science is bad science, it's not very clever for the politicians, and it's not we can't expect good outcome if the politicians are believing in the bad science. And I suspect that the fossil fuel companies, fossil fuel industry, is very happy with the bad science and all those myths, I think is what they call them in the paper. Mike McCracken doesn't like the word myth, but he's very supportive of IPCC and the strategy. And that's come out. He's made remarks that sound extraordinarily like Michael Mann. And some other comments that sound as if he's but very much supportive of the IPCC process. He's a very kind of conventional man, I think. Conventional scientist in that respect. So there's possibility of building on the paper that's been written on the bad science, and I've pointed out that one could say much more about the tipping points, and there's a very general misunderstanding of tipping points. One of the big myths promoted by the IPCC is that the tipping points haven't yet been activated, and they're going to be activated at 1.5, or they're liable to be, and almost certainly by 2 degrees. But actually, most of the critical tipping points were activated in the 1980s. So the Arctic sea ice started its accelerated retreat in around 1980, and you can tell by looking at the difference between the observations and the models. So they started diverging, and there was until 2012 there was an exponential decline. So the exponential curve was the best fit up until 2012, and then the curve started bending around the other way. So there's a slow decline into the new state of the Arctic, which will be with much less sea ice in the summer. So I think we need to say something about the tipping points. We somehow need to get that across, and I'm wondering whether we shouldn't have a companion paper to the one that's going through from Peter Wadhams about about the bad science. We could have a supplement on tipping points. Does anybody have any suggestions about that? The difficulty is always, how do we get through to somebody who can make a difference to the real politic? So we see that Sir David King is trying very hard, and he has talked about the tipping points in the Arctic in some of his various groups that one that he's called the Climate Change Advisory Group, CC. I don't know how you pronounce it, but CCAG is a group, and they've produced some good output. But even he is swimming against the tide of I can't focus on fossil fuel emissions, and in order to get listened to at all, he has to go along with that a bit. and then say, well, it's all very good, but it's not doing quite enough. And we know it's not doing nearly enough, and it's almost a qualitative difference is required. So we need to focus on albedo and cooling rather than CO2 and greenhouse gases.
John, I think some of these issues are brought into some level of clarity, as Jonathan has pointed out in the chat, by the comment from the head of COP, Sultan Al Jaber. I wrote up my views on it, and he says that there's no science or scenario that says the phase out of fossil fuels is going to achieve 1.5, and that's created quite a furious backlash, and yet it's a bit like just the interpretation of statements by politicians is often contentious, and it seems to me that his statements were quite simply factual, but they're factual statements that are unacceptable to the ideological campaign that just completely dominates climate politics. Just the whole idea that the main agenda is to decarbonize as rapidly as possible is something that is generating quite a significant gradual social concern, and so. But the practical debate around it in terms of alternatives has not really been allowed. It is my impression into the public sphere. So the implications there are that it's very clear that emission reduction alone is absolutely incapable of doing anything to affect weather or temperature for decades. And so, firstly, emissions reduction isn't working because emissions are going up. But secondly, even if somehow there was a turnaround in the trajectory of emissions, it would slowly stop things worsening, perhaps, but quite unlikely that it would even slowly stop things working because of tipping points. Just that it's probable that tipping points would shift the world into a hothouse phase well before any actual climate impacts of cutting emissions could occur. And so the inference, I think, that can be drawn from the COP president's remarks is that given that cutting emissions won't affect temperature, that there ought to be a proper discussion about geoengineering, which has been excluded from the public discourse.
So did this man, is it Al Sabir?
Al Jaber.
Sultan
Al Jaber, who's the head of the
Al Jaber, yeah. Okay,
so
sorry.
He's the head of the oil company, which is why people have been so furiously hostile towards him and have jumped on his and have scrutinized his every remark in order to attack him. And it raises this vexed question of, so there's this view that for Qatar to place him as the head of the COP is a straight conflict of interest, and is a correct.
But he was saying something true, was he? Does he say that emissions reduction wasn't going to reduce temperature? Is that
Well,
what
if
he
you're
said?
listening to what I said just now,
Yeah.
he said there is no science out there or no scenario out there that says that the phase out of fossil fuels is going to achieve 1.5. So that's and then he went on to uh, to uh, to say that we should be real, serious, and pragmatic about climate policy. And so again, that was an implication that the people he was talking to were not being real, serious, or pragmatic. And so the whole question of the value of pragmatism is a really difficult one, because people say pragmatism is just corruption, and so it's I think it opens quite an important public debate. I wanted to welcome Brew. Nice to see you join us, Brew. And
Hi, Robert.
I see
I've just put a link to that discussion in the chat there, and I agree with you. It's the first time I paid attention to the man. I think he's actually highly intelligent. And it's interesting. Maybe it would be an interesting dialogue with him, talking more about a sensible transition and talking about the things we need to do to recover the position. So in the same vein, I was very pleased with King Charles's speech, which I thought was excellent.
I haven't heard any news about that. Okay.
That was the opening. The
course,
two opening speeches of the COP were both worth listening to. One by the Secretary General, and then by King Charles.
Right.
And it was all down the restoration and restoring the natural systems side of things, which, of course, my work has all been down that line. Bring back the missing 550 gigatons of living biomass that we've lost, and the sums on that are quite clear. You then come back down to around about 300 parts per million, allowing for off-gassing from the ocean and unavoidable emissions. But more to that, you end up with double the amount of forest, and you have restored natural systems for planetary cooling. Rob Delat and Peter Bunyard have done some excellent work on that. And we're getting really good data on the oceans too coming through.
Brew, do you agree that increasing biomass requires an increase of albedo as a precondition? Like, do we need to? My sense is
no,
that,
not at all, not at all.
Right. Okay. I mean, so my sense
it comes as a byproduct of restoring ocean nutrient cycles.
Yeah.
Bringing back a lot of phytoplankton, but the evidence is suggesting that evapotranspiration and the biological input to that, the aerosols that go with it in the form of algae spores and other emissions, and the zooa and phytoplankton's impact on the ocean atmosphere interface is really important in controlling the rates of evaporation and evapotranspiration, and therefore what's released, and therefore what's in the atmosphere for cloud formation. These are mechanisms by which the interreacting biomass life of the planet actually cools itself just as well as you or I do. Gaia herself is able to control her temperature.
Well, except that the temperature, the Gaia can't control her temperature while there's runaway emissions, and while temperature is rising. And so the immediate question is to enable us to get those biological repair functions working by cutting the temperature. And so that's why I say in terms of
the two things work together, though. I mean, if you get planting and irrigation systems working right, then you start changing microclimate, and that changes albedo, and that changes the amount of evapotranspiration, and you start getting cooling. And actually, we know this where very large-scale environmental restoration projects have taken place, that you substantially start changing microclimates, and then you attract more rain into it, and the whole thing starts to roll. So I think it's a really interesting area of science that's been overlooked at the moment. There's much more to be done. The other program that was really good, did anybody watch Planet Earth 3 Humanity last night?
No.
At Edinburgh, which was excellent. Again, he was pushing down the restoration route, very strong on agrotech, freeing up 2/3 of the farmland now for rewilding, and therefore, of course, carbon drawdown. That was to me very encouraging. And I think that the fastest growing stuff, of course, is the phytoplankton, the algae, and that has a direct albedo impact. As you know, very slight greening of the entire ocean, but that would make a big difference. And if you follow Seth Clark's work with the ocean fertilization by buoyant flakes, I see that as being extremely benign. Bring back the food, that bring back the whale. One of the things on last night's program was these massive fishing vessels that have been designed to capture krill and fish for krill, which is then mainly used to feed farmed salmon. The trouble with that is the little krill who graze on the phytoplankton then dive down deep and defecate, and they're an incredibly important part of the carbon pump. So they're drawing down CO2 or carbon on a daily basis. And the worst thing, you take away the food from the whales in the form of the krill. The whales have been recorded as being very thin as they migrate back up into the Indian Ocean to breed. And of course, they're not there and healthy. They're not defecating so much, so you're not getting the fertilization. So the phytoplankton levels reduce. Whaling ships don't refertilize the ocean. Or not whaling ships, but krill fishing ships, should I say, which puts new pressure on the poor wretched whales. So, anyway, I think it's good that these things are coming forward.
Yeah, those are all really good things that I think I'd be interested to talk further on the sequencing, but I'd like to invite Jonathan to speak. And I also noticed Marshall put a comment in the chat that he might like to speak to, but let's hear from Jonathan.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, I think we should celebrate a fundamental concept of both physics and the way the human mind works is you can't progress into a space which is already occupied by something. And this concept that the drawdown or the reduction in emissions of CO2 is going to cool the planet in time for any significant life to survive that we care about, it's a concept that's in the minds of so many actors. And this statement that concept is useless is such a beautiful wedge issue for us, because we have to move that idea that reduction is going to have any kind of meaningful effect in the proper time frame. We have to move that concept out of the way before the space opens to fill it with the different concept, which is increased albedo and direct cooling. So I celebrate, the statement, and if it can hold ground and be built upon, we may have experienced the wedge event in this kind of a statement. Because as we know, it's absolutely true. And therefore, it should have some staying power. And we should support it, in any way we can.
Yeah, look, it just raises such incredible politics around the relationship between the oil industry and climate policy. And so those are going to be, very sensitive debates that this material will raise. Thanks, Jonathan. Now, Marshall, did you want to speak?
Sure, just briefly, it's kind of a follow-up to what Jonathan's talking about, but more about the comments that were made about what's going on at COP and who's running it and the oil companies. I was at several COPs already, and I've noticed that if you take the oil and gas industry, the coal industry, and big ag and big chemical and combine them together, they dwarf all the other attendees in all these functions, and they're all advocating pretty much for the same thing. And that's why I made that comment about intersectionality. If you know Crenshaw, he came up with this concept back in the 80s, and there's three forms of intersectionality. And what we're seeing here, in my opinion, is a demonstration of a confluence of all three at the same time. We're seeing it in the conflicts with, let's say, Iran, the conflict in Gaza, Israel, and also in the Ukraine. But we're seeing it specifically in the climate issues. And people have an interest, their self-interest at heart. These industries have been making money the same way for about 200 years. And there's a lot of stovepiped decision-making processing going on, even amongst people who are in our area. So what happens is it gives these big industries the ability to actually overpower our voices and our message. And they also get to change the message in a way. They take what you say and twist it. It's a form of psychology. It's also a form of power. And so basically what we're seeing is, if you want to get your message out, and I agree with Jonathan that we have something positive to say, and we have a lot of things good to say, but we have to think about it in terms of how to overcome the actual tool sets that the opposition, that's the way I look at them, are using to try to keep things as they are. And as we know, the climate is changing, and it's going to change at an exponential rate. So, and it is changing at an exponential rate, and especially about the Antarctica. So my point is, it's important to have all the science-based arguments you want, but if you're talking to people who deny science or try to distort it or change your message against you, then how do you deal with that? And that's where the understanding of intersectionality and the three forms of it come into play. So that's my comment.
See, I've seen intersectionality only used as a term within the political left to describe the intersection of different forms of oppression. But you're using it in a different way to describe the intersection of different forms of power, which is
Yes.
quite
Which was what Crenshaw originally designed. This adoption for the left is true, but that doesn't mean the right hasn't adopted it or used it, or different forms of intersectionality. And it's usually used as a mechanism to oppress others, whether it's the left oppressing others or the right oppressing others or some dictator oppressing somebody. Intersectionality is a great tool because it helps blur the lines in people's minds. Maybe not our minds. We know what we believe, but there are many people out there we're asking to check out the science. And if intersectionality can make it sound like that science is bad or non-existent or simply non-functional, you don't even have to go and say it's bad. You just say it's not functional. There's a lot of ways of doing this, and it has to do with a form of psychology. I have a background in clinical psychology, and I can tell you that if you were dealing with a patient that has these attributes, you'd have to treat them a certain way, and there's a methodology, but you're talking about a whole cultural approach to this. So that's I'm just trying to bring to the table to everybody here that it's not just the science. There's more involved here if we were going to get our message out there and use the science to address it.
Absolutely. Let's come back to that. And Rebecca?
Well, my comment is overall on the same theme, but what I wanted to say is I read the discussion about Mary Robinson's comments that Robert Chris posted. But I think what the Sultan has said is very unclear, and it sounds as though he just wants to keep selling oil, and he's a climate denier. That's what it sounds like when you read him. We're adding our own backdrop that 1.5 can't be achieved by net zero or by fossil fuel reduction. But that isn't what the message sounds like. So that's the main thing I wanted to say. I've got a different topic, but I'll just let that one rest for a moment.
Could I have could Marshall? Could you just go over the three? You said there were three things about this intersectionality, and I got two. I think.
Well, Marshall,
one was
in the chat. He said structural, political, and representational.
Oh, right. I see. Those are the three. Now, do those three all apply to climate change?
Well, this is my observation. You don't have to agree with me, but
yeah.
Based upon my observation of what we're seeing at the COPs, and I've been to several of them already, and I didn't go to this one because it's, to me, blah, 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 blah. So sorry for that. But basically, it is a combination of all three. And it's kind of like, think of it as it's not equal distribution. People use it depending on what they're trying to accomplish. The big ag, the big chemical, the big oil, and the big coal industries that attend these, I've watched them when I'm there, and they're very clever. They've got really, they don't only have attorneys and lawyers or advocates on their behalf, but they also have professional, what I would call marketeers, people who are good at crafting messages the way they want it.
Public relations, spin merchants.
Yes, spin merchants. That's a good word. Thank you, Robert. That's perfect. They're spin merchants, and unfortunately, we live in a world where this intersectionality has taken hold, and it's insane what people are believing today, in my opinion. But it is what it is. So so I think if you're going to address it, a very holistic approach needs to be taken beyond just the science. You definitely need the science. There's no doubt about it. I'm big on science, but in that area. But I think there's a psychological approach that has to be thought out and thought through, because this is a cultural, governmental, and a representative approach. That's the three sections of intersectionality that are being bound together and delivered in a very sophisticated way, and it fools people. You see it, and we're seeing it briefly in the last several weeks. I mean, I'm seeing it day in and day out, everywhere I am, everywhere I go. So it's not just climate, but it's a lot of political issues. It's everything. We're seeing it on many fronts, and what you have to, I think, in my opinion, what needs to be understood is that it's a merging of all these things. So if you're concerned about climate change and you want climate restoration and climate repair to go forward, and the way we believe it should go forward, and based on science, it's not just enough. You have to understand the psychology of the other players and what they're trying to accomplish. And is there a way to, like jujitsu, flip it on them? That's my opinion. I think we can use a jujitsu move. I studied jujitsu as a kid, where you can actually flip your opponent on its back, and when they're least expecting it. And I think that's why I'm part of this group, because I think we have the brains and the knowledge and the foresight to understand not just the science, but to understand the greater human condition that we're being faced with this intersectionality approach.
So the principle there, Bruce,
we need to be smart in our analysis of the other side of this. The first thing is that not everybody on the hydrocarbon side is a baddie. There are many good people within that who, you know, are positioned to swing it. They are immensely powerful in the organizations. They have enormous wealth. They have huge capability. They have resources to apply to all sorts of techniques that we could usefully use. So, you know, we've got to woo and persuade, concentrate on the right people, identify those that are really bad, target the bad individuals, and try and help that industry move into an adaptation mode. You know, we're on the same planet, and they have very, very good science. The other side of it is the legal structures behind this. You know, you're a director of a company with responsibilities to your shareholders and pension funds, and you know these vast arguments that are going on. So we have to help them find ways around that. We have to find routes to profit that will enable them to support their shareholders' requirements, show those transitions of the business from one thing to another. And Nokia was a forestry company which moved into mobile phones. Okay, they've gone over the top now, but it is perfectly possible for large industries to make a complete transition if you can develop and show a route to it and gain acceptance. So I suppose what I'm saying is being totally adversarial isn't going to help us. You get entrenched positions. That jiu-jitsu move is find the right guys and help them to the top. But on our side, we got to get a lot smarter. We need bright young people who are working on these things and analyze it from every angle. The public relations angle, the messaging, you know, how you influence the shareholders within those companies. It goes on and on.
That's exactly my point. So we're on the same page, Brew, just
Yep.
so you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that theme of using your opponent's momentum to achieve your own objective is like that's the I suppose judo as well is the principle there. And so defining, you know, what is that opposing momentum, and what is your objective? There needs to be a bit more clarity in those questions. Rebecca, unmute, please.
What I'm wondering is, does anyone know if the Sultan, or it's the same theme as what Brutus said, but what does the Sultan actually think about repair and albedo and SRM? Does anyone know what he thinks when if we really think that his statement means something sophisticated?
I think it's pretty clear that they're looking for ways of solving the problem quickly and achieving stability. So I think they would be very open to planetary cooling ideas. I think the point he's making is that emissions reduction alone and switching off the emissions isn't going to solve the problem. After all, Dubai was substantially flooded, you know, just under 3 weeks ago. They had horrendous floods and they're still reeling from the damage. If you look at the Acapulco super hurricane that went in there, Otis, you know, that went from a tropical storm to a Category 5 in 12 hours, a hit that's never been seen before, and absolutely devastated a city of 1 million people. It took the curtain walls off tower blocks and tower hotels and blew them right through. Dubai is exposed to a similar thing now, and God, what a mess that's going to make if you get a Cat 4 or 5 running into Dubai. So, and they're aware of it. They know the risk is there. So the door's open, much more open to the geoengineering side, talking to them, than it is talking to some people in our science community, because we're all different. And there's the, you know, geoengineering is a dirty word and don't go near it brigade, who are huge and have, you know, massive organizations that think in that way, Greenpeace, etc. There are friends out there to be found in the fossil fuel industries. Look at OTEC.
The other thing I wanted to mention on a related topic, I don't know who sees Dave Borlace's videos, but he sent one around by Simon Clark recently, which is, they're both subscription, but I got it because I subscribed to Dave. Simon Clark has made a video from 2100 looking backwards as to what did humans do to save the planet, and it's a scenario all about all the lingo jingo words that we're all talking about. Peak emissions in 2035, 1.5 is reached in 2040. 2044 is a fulcrum year with no ice in the Arctic and a big increase in albedo. 2060 is the year of net zero. 2063 is peak greenhouse concentrations because the biosphere starts to take up more emissions, carbon, than what's in emissions. 2081 is the year of negative emissions, and then you know, there's a huge party with Greta Thunberg saying we did it, that sort of thing, in 2081. He talks about tipping points. He talks about rising sea levels, immigration, refugees, food productions, a whole shebang. But it was quite sophisticated in one way, because the tipping point idea, Simon was saying, it's not just a thing like that where you're up and you're over. It was much more what we've been discussing, that you can get back from them. But the whole thing was a good exercise in the sense of trying to motivate people and think we can fix this problem. But I wrote to Dave Borlace afterwards and sent him some of our materials. What it doesn't recognise is extreme weather events, and tipping points are closer than what we think they are, or, you know, that some of the tipping points were way out, a long way away. And what I said to Dave is there's nothing in there at all about the need for planetary cooling, and it's all just more of the same, and how we're going to do more of it and fix things. So Dave said he was going to read everything that I sent. But I found it, what I'm thinking about writing to him, and he will no doubt, I mean, he seems to take what I sent him seriously. I'm thinking of writing and saying, could he and Simon have a think about a story where there was planetary cooling, and see what the story would look like then. But to me, it was an unrealistic fairy tale, good in the sense of trying to motivate people, but not good in terms of the actual science of where we are. And so I wanted to mention that, because it's a similar thing about the story of what can be done and what should be done.
Yeah, my sense is that I've watched a few of Dave's Just Have a Think programs, and he has at times been somewhat condescending towards the whole cooling agenda. I'm not sure if I'm being unfair on him there, but the whole debate around cooling doesn't seem to properly register. So I wanted to come back to Bruce's comment about Acapulco, and I made this diagram of the sea surface temperature. Well, I didn't make the picture. I put it into a slide with some text, and so the trajectory of the hurricane, which increased from 60 to 160 miles per hour in a very short space of time, due to this really hot water, 30-degree water. And the point being that if there had been measures taken to cool that water when the technology to do so was first proposed, then the destruction of Acapulco could have been averted, and the destruction of many other places that's impending could have been averted. But it's a lack of political clarity, and so seeing how I would like to explore Marshall's point about intersectionality more, because I don't really understand the differences between the structural, the political, the representational. I suppose that there's a sort of there's a clear intersection between economic and political power, and so that's in some ways a simple argument, but in other ways an extraordinarily complicated argument, because we've seen how the conservative movement has been able to generate mythology in its and I think equally the progressive movement, that mass politics operates on a mythological basis. And this was what John Nissen was commenting on in relation to how people have entrenched opinions which are quite impervious to evidence. So if you can create that sort of tribal intersection, then you can really control the political debate. And so it's a question of finding places where there is a chink in that debate, where its wall of a barrier breaks down somehow. And I think that's inevitable in the COP process, because it's very clear that emission reduction is just not going to make any difference to weather and temperature. Yeah, and thanks, Jim. I see your comment about OTEC, and very true. You know, if those really hot surface waters were used for electricity, then it would reduce hurricane intensity. I think that's a really important point. And you know, I see that there's debate about, you know, does shifting that surface heat down below the thermocline work in the long term? But I think I agree with your hypothesis that it would mitigate extreme weather, and and that's really what we need to do as the most urgent thing.
Yeah, okay, there's a slight pause. Two things. The immediate thing is I did look into Otis and the possibility of marine cloud brightening, because a paper has been written about marine cloud brightening in the Gulf of Mexico. Unfortunately, it wouldn't work.
That was a really dumb paper, John, because that was about 2 years ago, and it argued that if you did marine cloud brightening in the face of an already formed hurricane, that it wouldn't work. And but Stephen Salter has said that marine cloud brightening would only work at the formation of a hurricane. And that is, if you cool the overall sea temperature. So that, and Stephen and I also wrote to the authors of that paper, received nothing back, which indicated that it was just crap politics to me.
Anyhow, I wasn't referring to that paper, much more recent,
sorry, John.
by Doug McMartin, who was showing, he used the kind of forcing results that Stephen had for Aitken mode and that kind of thing. So it was a very pucker science, he's a very good thorough scientist, is Doug McMartin. Him occasionally helping us in our work. Unfortunately, the Otis, it was the hot water problem originated in the East Pacific. But even so, it took the modelers by surprise by the rapid acceleration of the intensity.
And it took the forecasters by surprise.
Speed of it, or short. Yeah.
There was no warning to the people of Acapulco of the risk.
Yeah, they had observed this very rapid escalation before, and they have a theory which I think is very interesting, that that there was a jet stream quite close to the north, and it was injecting energy into the cyclone and speeding it up. I can kind of imagine this happening, that you could get an energy transfer from the jet stream into it was already spinning slowly and speed it up.
It's the third form of intersectionality. The climate intersection between the jet stream and the hot water of the tropics.
Yeah, the things combine, but that's an interesting case of a combination. The case that I've always been talking about, or have been in the past, was where you get the jet stream stopping the wave pattern staying in one place, and there, if you've got hot weather, you then get a heat dome building up, and you get extremes that way. But this effect is due to kind of meandering of the jet stream, and then kind of positioning itself just north of a cyclone that's developing and causing an extreme weather event in that way. And there are other ways that the jet stream works to intensify storms. It can block the passage of a storm, and so you then get a dump of rain, heavy rain, and that produced 3 times the previous record amount of rain that Texas had ever had, and you get the Sandy effect, where the storm was going up the east coast just offshore, up east coast of the States, and then it kind of turned left, I turned westward when it reached New York, and that was put down to the blocking of its passage by a jet stream, stationary jet stream, kind of blocking its path. So all sorts of things that we can actually improve if we can just provide a blanket cooling of the Arctic. That puts more energy into the movement of the jet stream wave around the planet, and these effects will hopefully diminish without. So I'm very, very optimistic that we do have a rather effective solution, and it costs next to nothing, and it solves a heck of a lot of problems. I don't see why the people who are not opposed to SRM, the more pragmatic people, including the fossil fuel companies or the more sensible individuals, mightn't buy into this. So I think we really need to do some prodding and talk to our friends in the oil industry. I think some of you have even worked or advised in the oil industry. I'm looking at you, Doug. No, I thought you had.
Well,
anyway,
John McDonald and I met last week with an engineer from Worley's, and who is a global engineering company with a focus on the oil and gas industry, to just discuss the potential for them to fund research on marine cloud brightening. And the situation is that the technical readiness level of marine cloud brightening is so low that it's quite difficult for companies like that to justify taking a lead, and we've got a sort of general problem of a first mover crisis, which is that all of these different industries, whether it be engineering or shipping or insurance or banking, who would clearly benefit from a cooler planet with less extreme weather, but all of them are saying, "Oh, it's not up to us to take a lead," and everyone's waiting for somebody else to do something, and so as a result, nothing gets done. And so, like, we're just looking for $50,000 or $100,000 as a way of creating some momentum in the work that Stephen Salter is doing in Edinburgh, and it's been extraordinarily frustrating that for a decade, Stephen has had ideas about things that can be done, but because of the intensity of the opposition from the emission reduction alone ideology that dominates the climate community, there's been just really strong barriers to and so all of these commercial potential partners, they have the same problem that they say, well, we see this intense political hostility to what you're saying, and we're only commercial companies, and we're not going to put our head above the parapet and get it shot down by all of these people in the way Al Jabeer has just been shot down, and so yeah, it's quite a challenge. So, but anyway, and of course, like, we've had quite a lot of debate about the sensitivity of seeking funding from people aligned with the fossil fuel industries, and there are many people in our community who say that that's just either morally or tactically wrong, and so that's an important debate to explore. Jonathan.
Thanks. Just this morning, I had a call with an author, Bud Abbott, who's going to write a book about SRM, and he wanted to lead with the energy. Well, what do we call it? Could be called energy return on investment, cooling return on investment, cooling return on cost. It's a fluid concept, but basically he's going to use something like a 3-to-1 ratio with window air conditioner, and a 3,000-to-1 ratio with ground-based reflectors made out of foil. And then he's using a quote from Stephen Salter, where he proposed an 80,000-to-1 ratio of some sort for the most efficient use of marine cloud brightening. And then for the
on our website, we quote Stephen as saying a 50,000-to-1 benefit. I'll find the exact thing and I'll put it in the chat.
And then he's using he's trying to piece together one for a sulfur injection, and it's looking like it might even be better than the marine cloud brightening, just on a theoretical basis, in that 100,000 or more to 1 ratio, in terms of the difficulty of putting the sulfur there, and then the amount of energy that it then reflects from the planet. So so he's seeing, his theory is that the sizzle, there's the steak and then there's the sizzle, that the sizzle, and the reason these other groups are getting attention, is these very high ratios that they can claim. And like any investment, it looks speculatively like great return on investment. Of course, we know that there's side effects for each one, and those should have a cost into the ratio as well. But anyway, he's going to lead in his introduction to the book with these kind of numbers. So if we want to have any input to these numbers, this is a good time to formulate what we think is roughly correct.
Very good.
What's the name of the author that's doing this?
Bud Abbott, Abbott. Let's see what he looks like on the internet. Got a couple of books out. Traveled the world. Gotten into a lot of interesting situations. Kind of an adventure. Writer, great guy, great speaker. Lectures and captivates people with tales of the jungle and tales of the being captured by pirates and things like that. Not as silly as it sounds, in the sense that we need good authors on yeah, that looks like Bud 30 years ago. I'm looking at him on Wikipedia.
So Stephen's comment was that the cost of deploying marine cloud brightening would avert costs of sea level rise, which would be 50,000 times more expensive. So that's essentially a benefit cost ratio of 50,000 to 1. And David Keith and I think Harding in their paper made a very similar but broader claim, in which they said that the cost of doing a proper scientific study of geoengineering deployment would be about $2 billion. That is to properly study all of the different methods and work out how to take it forward, and that would avert expected climate damage costs of $10 trillion. And so that's a peer-reviewed article paper, which is, I think, really very compelling, very authoritative, but has been completely buried and ignored because it doesn't tell the political message that many people want to hear. So that's fine. I wanted to go back to John Nissen's comment about the jet stream, and I really liked that book. I think it was by Malcolm Gladwell, called Nudge, which was the idea of a very small push to a complex system can shift its trajectory, which is, I suppose, related to chaos theory. And so I find this concept of cooling as a way of nudging the system back towards stability is a really useful way to conceptualize the issue. And I hope that makes sense to you, John.
Yeah, yes, indeed. I think marine cloud brightening could do some specific nudging, literal nudging of the jet stream when it gets stuck. I'm not sure. I haven't worked out how it might work, but I think there is potential there. A bit of research required. If you can make it the clouds bright on one side, or rain a bit more, or something, you might get it shifting through some kind of creating some differential that moves it laterally, i.e. I think they call it zonally, as opposed to meridianally. Whereas the blanket cooling from stratospheric aerosol injection just changes gives the whole thing more energy to move eastward.
But equally,
So great scope, I think, for using marine cloud brightening in combination with stratospheric aerosol injection. So, I don't think marine cloud brightening has a chance to do the whole job. So the heavy lifting, I think, has to be stratospheric aerosol injection. But the marine cloud brightening has got huge potential to do what I would call kind of fine tuning, shifting here and there and alleviating perhaps some
regulating weather.
Doing a bit of local weather regulation might be really very welcome.
Place like Acapulco, just a bit of hurricane prevention would really do a lot. Doug.
Yeah, thanks. Getting back to John's comment about the oil companies. Yeah, I worked for Exxon for 2 years and realized halfway through there, that 2 years, I was a misfit. I fired myself. But since I retired, that was in 1970, 71, 72. Since I retired, I've been a pain in ExxonMobil's took us. I worked for Exxon. I was 5 years old, 5 years before Rex Tillerson. And he's an Eagle Scout and I'm an Eagle Scout. So my tack was to approach him on an Eagle Scout to Eagle Scout basis. And everybody within his circle knows me, and I've been blocked from every one of their Twitter accounts. And I know the guy who is in charge of the BS that they put out. He used to work for some of these think tanks, and he knows who I am, and he flipped me off as I was demonstrating outside their gate in the middle of the winter. So they know who I am. They're not going to talk to me. But the thought I had was, and by the way, I'm on a first name basis with Shell's global warming manager. What's his name? David Hone. He doesn't talk to me either. But the thought I had was this guy, Dr. Al Jaber, seems like a pretty intelligent guy. I saw what you wrote, Robert, and I think Robert, Chris, and some other people talked about him earlier. He's exactly right. I mean, if you read his words, he's right. Reducing emissions is not going to get us to 1.5. He said that. So what I'm thinking, John, is if he's as intelligent as I think he is, he's a doctor and he's repeating the IPCC line of net zero and all that BS. But if he would listen to us, he might be the right ally. I mean, he's getting a load of crap from everybody for what he said. But I really believe what he said was based on science, based on what we're talking about. You can't just shut everything down. If you try to shut all the oil down, you're going to have no plastics to build anything that's made out of plastics. Unless you do it with vegetables and stuff. Anyway, I just want to throw that out there that it's a complicated thing and he understands it. I think he might be open to it if we could get into him, talk to him.
The trouble is that there's no prospect of people like us getting access to somebody like an oil sheik, and but it's still useful for us to comment and discuss what the high and mighty say, because that debate that the Sultan is generating is actually really useful for our scientific understanding. And so I certainly do plan to continue to quote those remarks, and just find ways of finding other people who are able to engage with that discussion more constructively.
If only plastic were made from oil, that would be sequestered oil. We would not get the carbon in the atmosphere. The carbon that goes into plastics does not go to the atmosphere.
I thought it had to be refined. I thought you have to go through.
There'll be energy. You'll do other things to make the plastic, but the point is, I don't think plastics are a climate problem. They're actually a form of carbon sequestration.
They are an
That's a good point.
environmental problem, but not.
Yeah, it's a
they're-
different problem, perhaps
Yeah.
easier to solve.
Yeah. Well, the microplastics in the ocean are a really major problem for fish and ecosystems. But as far you're exactly right, Evan, that I think Doug, the point was like one of the issues there is that, as Vaclav Smil has argued, there are these absolutely major industries such as steel and ammonia and cement that rest entirely upon fossil fuels. And so the idea of shutting down fossil fuels is so when Al Jaber has said that shutting down fossil fuels would send us back to living in caves, that's I suppose a summary way of saying that the economic impact of rapid decarbonisation has not been properly thought through, and those are the arguments that Nate
we're still here, so so the recording's gone off back on again at
It came, yeah, right.
quarter past 9.
Well, my point was you can't really shut down all the oil because you're going to need plastics, whether it's made from oil or cornstarch, that's turnips and potatoes and whatever. And there's pros and cons to that too, but I don't see us ever getting off of oil.
Well, I'm not sure where I got cut off, but I was talking about Vaclav Smil's book, How the World Really Works, and he also talks about steel and ammonia and cement as just major fossil fuel dependent industries that have just got such economic centrality that the idea of shutting them down, like this was Al Jaber's point, that shutting down fossil fuels would his colorful language was that it would mean going back to live in caves, and those are the issue there is my feeling is that there's been a really systematic deception by renewable energy advocates around costings, because you see the analysis from, well, I quite like Simon Michaud, and I saw that Jasper Sky was quite aggressively challenging Simon Michaud's work, but I've watched a number of Simon Michaud's addresses, and his argument about the complete impracticality of the speed of scale up of renewable energy just seems to be a very compelling argument, and I think like he just talks about how long does it take to open a mine, and so if we're going to scale up wind, then we need absolutely vast amounts of copper, and just the practicalities of that. It's like the whole net zero argument. It's living in a fantasy world. And so there's been people saying that, but that there's an emperor in new clothes syndrome here, that people who are saying that it's fantasy to achieve net zero by 2050 are just completely marginalized with abuse. And so it's that same abuse that we've seen directed towards Al Jaber. I mean, firstly, it's the sort of obvious conflict of interest of him being in the oil industry and the head of COP. And so people just use that as an ad hominem argument to say that we can just completely ignore absolutely everything he says. And that's so finding ways to, but it reflects the trust deficit that's been created by political polarization. So people are simply incapable of listening to people who are in an opposing camp, and you've got these opposing political camps, and that gets back to Marshall's point about intersectionality, that the camps create a sort of intersectional worldview that is impervious to to any information from outside its assumptions.
Well, I think we've made some progress today. We'll have to finish fairly soon. But I think this idea of identifying key people who might be not one of the actively against SRM camp. I don't know how the SRM camp is pretty large, but it's not embracing everybody, and there are pragmatists who might see SRM as actually the most sensible way forward, which is what we're saying. It's blatantly sensible. You know, the world is too hot; it needs cooling down, and it's really as simple as that. Lots of repercussions. The sea ice, the meltdown in the Arctic, all sorts, and the Himalayas, all sorts of things. Just the whole planet's too hot; it needs to be cooled. And it's such a simple message. And we've got two methods which, in combination, could probably do the job of lowering global temperature and refreezing the Arctic. So, you know, we've got a solution now.
John, I wanted to come back to your original point about the debate between SAI and MCB, and I think the most interesting recent intervention in that was in the Global Warming in the Pipeline paper by James Hansen and colleagues, and where he said his argument was that marine cloud brightening, as proposed by Stephen Salter, is the most innocuous way to begin. And so I think that that's a sort of tactical political argument, because he recognizes that SAI may have more ability to cut radiative forcing on global scale. But like one of the basic problem of SAI is its global nature, and so the difficulty of doing regional SAI, because it's like the thing is that its great benefit of being stratospheric, and therefore the aerosols stay up longer and have more reflectivity, is like that. Scientific benefit is a political drawback, because it means that you can't restrict the aerosols within a local region, or let alone a political jurisdiction, and so what's needed in order to create a public awareness of the broad benefits of cooling is to start off with cooling actions that can be done locally, and this is where MEAR has great benefits. I went to our reject shop yesterday, and I bought 2 mirrors for $5 each, because I've got beehives, and I'm just thinking that putting as we get a hot summer, putting mirrors on top of my beehives may be a way of protecting them from the heat. But it's like that's just a sort of local thing in my backyard. But if scaling up from a backyard to a deployment of marine cloud brightening on the Great Barrier Reef, or off the coast of California in a local jurisdiction. So there's been I'll show you one other diagram which Doug McMartin used from the University of Washington Marine Cloud Brightening Project. It showed. Sorry, just a sec. I'll just share it. I thought that this one was a great diagram, because you can see all of these regions on the west coast of continents where MCB is optimal, and in the Southern Ocean. And so I found that just really helpful to get a bit of a handle. Like, so if people had 10 years ago deployed MCB off the California coast, then it would have had a significant impact on the El Nino temperature. And so anyway, these are local benefits, and so my political sense is that these local methods need to be socialized, and people need to have some comfort about the importance and value of cooling before there will be agreement for achieving the political agreements that will be needed to deploy SAI will just take longer, and part of that process can be achieved by just showing the conceptual benefits through deployment of MCB and MIR.
Yeah, yeah, that's a wonderful diagram. Do you have a link for it? A reference to the paper?
Doug said, as it showed on the, so Doug McMartin used it in his
oh, right, okay.
HPAC talk, and so the HPAC talk is up on the HPAC website, and and he what he said was that he received it from Sarah Doherty at the University of Washington. But I went hunting for it, and I haven't gone back to Doug to ask, or to Sarah. I do want to contact Sarah, like that whole University of Washington team. I haven't had any personal contact with, although Stephen is very close to Professor Wood there, and so I'm interested to work out how to follow up with them.
Yeah, because that would be very useful for the calculations for using marine cloud brightening to help refreeze the Arctic, because I can see there are areas which are suitable places for marine cloud brightening, which might have.
That's exactly right, especially here in the North Atlantic. So the Gulf Stream, this hot water is flowing from the Gulf up through this marine cloud brightening zone, which and if we deployed in like, starting in the Faroe Islands as a test, and then going out into the broader North Atlantic, then and similarly here, there's water flowing up through the north through the Bering Strait, and so like cooling the water that's coming into the Arctic seems to me the best way to cool the Arctic, and it's even possible that tropical MCB, like, I'm surprised that there isn't benefits identified in the Central Pacific, but tropical MCB would the tropospheric, it's this Brewer-Dobson flow. There's these Hadley cells, the 3 cells, and that they would transport that cooling energy from the tropics up to the poles. So getting that systemic view is just really important. And this is where there's been lots of I suppose I think erroneous comment that says to cool the Arctic you can only do it in the Arctic, whereas looking at the planet as a system, you can see that you can cool the poles by cooling the tropics.
Okay. Yeah. I think we have a lot of agreement on that.
Let's hear from Rebecca, John. So we just got a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
I just wondered if anyone else had seen Simon Clark's video, and
I watched it.
Is there any point in trying to get them to have a think about things. Anyway, I don't know.
Just have a think, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. I keep chipping away, but
Yeah. I did feel, Rebecca, that he was too focused on emission reduction as a solution. That was my impression, and so that's
there was nothing else. I mean, there was talking about the biosphere taking out carbon, and I don't know whether he talked a lot about removal technologies, but it was sort of just a projection of where we are now with net zero, wasn't it? Anyway.
That's right, yeah. And I also looked through several hundred slides from Peter Carter, and you know, he just gave his talk at MIA, and he opened up quite a good conversation about both MIA and SAI, and so but again, his theme is the insanity of the world, which he is very eloquent about explaining just how insane the current situation is. But as far as solutions, you know, I would like to open up the conversation about marine cloud brightening as a more innocuous starting point to nudge the world towards practical solutions. It's the thing is, it's a practical thing that can be done to then generate a broader paradigm shift.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're just about coming to the end. Are there any other points people want to make? Anybody wants to make? Okay. In which case, let's bring this to an end. Just want to say that I started by suggesting we did a comparison, and there was no between marine cloud brightening and stratospheric aerosol injection. There was no objection to that. So I think that's something we can start putting together and making it a PRAG output. And the other thing is outreach, and we need to get out to people who are not already, you know, committed anti-SRM people, and people who might people from the fossil fuel industry who might like to find a way out of the impasse which they find themselves in. And going to the top might work. I once wrote to the head of the IPCC. I did eventually get a reply. He said, treat SRM as mitigation. But he didn't say anything more than that. But that's actually what Peter Wadhams and the others say in their paper, that SRM is a form of mitigation. It's a form of dealing with a problem. And I think we do have some friends in high places, like Sir David King. So he might find an opening to the Sultan. That kind of, you know, he's such a good diplomat. So right. So that's so thank you everybody for a good meeting. I think useful meeting.
Thanks all.
Some ideas to work on.
Goodbye.
Cheers.